What's up, Falcon fans? On today's episode, we're going to talk about the Minnesota Vikings versus the Atlanta Falcons. If you guys like this type of content, hit that like button. If you guys hate this type of content, hit that dislike button. It will hurt your boy's feelings. Well, maybe just a little bit. But also, if you want to do a huge favor for your boy, by hitting that subscribe button, it will help out the empire grow tremendously. So on that note, let's dive into the 7 categories that I have for today's video. Let's get started with category number 1. The Minnesota Vikings are traveling to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, so I'm going to give my points to the Atlanta Falcons. Let's talk about category number 2. Coaches versus coaches. Kevin O'Connell versus Arthur Smith. Let's start off with the Vikings head coach first. So Kevin is the second-year head coach for the Minnesota Vikings back in 2022 through 2023 as it stands right now. Now, he was previously the offensive coordinator for the LA Rams in 2020 through 2021. So that means his offensive philosophy is building the run game first when it comes to the zone schemes, primarily in the inside and the outside zone runs, and a lot of duo cross route combos, play action passes, and all that crazy palaver that Arthur Smith is also trying to establish in Atlanta. But what's really interesting is that in his first year in 2022, he gave the Minnesota Vikings a 13-win and a 4-loss record. You know, they won first in their NFC North division, and they lost in the playoffs against the New York Giants, but they did a pretty good job now in 2023, where their record is 4-4 as well as the Atlanta Falcons. But in the early beginnings, they went 0-3, but after week 6, they went 3-0. And what really impresses me and a lot of fans was how they beat the 49ers. At that time, they were 5-1, and they were averaging 30-plus points per game and not allowing the opposing team to score even 20-plus points per game. So how they beat them 22-17 was something marvelous to watch, and that shows you, what Kevin can do with a Viking squad. So now let's talk about Arthur Smith. With all honesty, I honestly don't know how I feel about Arthur Smith anymore. I like him, but I don't like him. He's like the Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for me. So on that note, I'm going to give my points to Kevin O'Connell because I think he did a very fantastic job when he got the job for the Minnesota Vikings. Just under his first season alone, that just shows you what type of mentality coaching he can bring. So now let's talk about category number 3. Falcons quarterback and wide receiver versus the Vikings secondary. Let's start out with the Falcons. As it stands right now, Desmond Ridder has been benched for Taylor Heineke. Now, Heineke is a very interesting type of quarterback. For most Falcon fans, we kind of remember him back in 2018 when he played for the Carolina Panthers for his first start against us, and he looked pretty bad. But when he went with the Washington Commanders, he beat us twice pretty badly. We should have won, but we didn't because of him and how he elevate his team and his wide receivers to win those games. But outside of that, most Falcon fans don't really watch Washington Commander games, so we don't really know him like that. But so far as the Atlanta Falcons suit up type of situation, he did pretty good against the Tennessee Titans that do have a really good defensive scheme, and he did a pretty good job in the second half of that game. So hopefully when he plays a full 60-minute game, I can give you my truly evaluation on him. But for right now, I'm just gonna bite my time. So now let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings secondary. They are a pretty decent unit in Evans, Murphy Jr., Smith and Byam. They all have interceptions, including the other safety as well, where they have 6 total interceptions, and 5 of those come from the secondary and backfield. So they know they have some ball hawking type of mentality back there. And so the only time they really got demolished was against the Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers. But besides that, those other games, they shut down completely their wide receiving core and pretty much the quarterback play as well. And I know some people are going to say, what about the Philadelphia Eagles game when they scored 34 points to 28 for the Minnesota Vikings? Remember, the Vikings fumbled 4 times. So my point is going to the Minnesota Vikings secondary. Now let's talk about category number 4. Falcons running back, tight end, and O-line versus the Vikings front 7. Let's start out with the Falcons. We all know that the Atlanta Falcons run attack is really good. That's our bread and butter. We average 120 plus rushing yards and average 3 to 5 points per carry, so that's a fantastic job. Our tight ends are pretty good. They help Desmond Ridder elevate his game, moving the chains. We do a lot of good blocking with the tight ends as well. But the problem is with the offensive line is the passing game, because usually we allow Desmond Ridder to get sacked 4+ times. Now, obviously, that could either be because the offensive line does not give Desmond Ridder enough time to see or to adjust the play callings or where his wide receiver weapons or tight ends, whoever, needs to be targeted correctly. Or is that Desmond Ridder is just not quite yet ready to read the defense, where it takes him longer to adjust and try to get outside the pocket or whatever crazy palaver happens. But when Taylor Heinicke was on the field on the second half against the Tennessee Titans, he only got sacked once, but he got out of some of these dangerous pass rush and got a lot of quick throws in where he moved the chains quick enough where the offensive line kind of covered him up. So that's very interesting, and we have to really see and dive back into the past and look at the elevation of the offensive line even more. But on that note, let's talk about the Vikings front seven. They're a really good tackling unit. They really get after anybody that has the ball surrounding them. Hunter, he has 10 sacks already. He has 12 tackles for losses. And then, the two linebackers, Davenport and DJ, they're really good as well. They're just tackling machine. And then, they're Phillips, their defensive tackle, because they are a 4-3 defense. And yeah, I can't say enough negativity things about them because they do a lot on the defense, and they have 23 total sacks, and they also have 13 forced fumbles at their disposal. So my points are actually going to the Minnesota Vikings front seven. Now let's talk about category number 5. Vikings quarterback and wide receiver versus the Falcons secondary. Let's start out with the Vikings first. Even if Justin Jefferson doesn't play, Jordan Addison, who's been balling out lately with 7 total touchdowns, 482 receiving yards, and then of course you got KJ Osborne, who's also a pretty good baller with 2 receiving touchdowns that has accumulated 360 receiving yards as well, and then you got Brandon Powell, who's also been pretty good for them in tight situations, including against that 49ers game where Addison kind of went out a little bit. But besides them, we can't underestimate them because they're a pretty good wide receiving core unit. Now, it all depends on the quarterback situation with Dobbs and Hall. Now, obviously, Dobbs did a pretty good job when he was with the Arizona Cardinals. Nothing too spectacular, but that run game of his, oh yeah, that's very deadly. And knowing that the Atlanta Falcons defense has not stopped the quarterback run play is kind of scary. And then Hall is a rookie, so I actually have no idea what to expect. Now, I know in BYU, he did a pretty good job over there, so it's going to be very interesting to see because I don't know who's going to start, but the Atlanta Falcons defense better step up. And speaking of the Atlanta Falcons defense, let's talk about their secondary. They got torched by D-Hop, the only player that balled out against us, and then of course the refs kind of torched us, and then some of the defensive scheme-wise that I didn't really like that allowed, with 2 incredible touchdowns by the young quarterback and Will Levis. Unfortunately, it went against us, and we made him look like an all-star, superstar, all-pro, golden jacket type of mentality for a first-time starter, and it did not sit well with me. But hopefully, that was just a one-time thing because usually the Atlanta Falcons defense are really great at shutting down the wide receivers and quarterback duos, unlike the previous years. So hopefully, that won't happen again when we're going to face young bucks at this time around. So I'm going to give my points to the Atlanta Falcons secondary just because of how experienced they are. Now let's talk about category number 6. Vikings running back, tight end, and O-line versus the Falcons front seven. Let's start off with the Vikings. Their rushing attack is in the mid of the pack where they average 70 yards per game. Their 2 running backs in Madison and Akers usually average 3 points, whatever the number is. But in total, they have 586 total rushing yards. They have 1 rushing touchdown that was from last week ago. And their biggest, longest rushing yards was 19. So that tells you they just can't find the correct holes where the offensive line is trying to give them. But when it comes to the passing game, that's a little bit different. Because usually when Kirk Cousins was at the fold, he has over 2,331 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, and only 5 interceptions and 17 sacks. So he gets enough time in the pocket where he finds his guys to make big plays. And of course, we can't talk about the refurbished tight end and TJ Hawkinson, where he's looking like his 2020 Detroit Lion days, where he's averaging 50 yards per game, where he's averaging 6 receptions per game. And each time he gets the ball, he averaged 10 yards per reception. So that's pretty scary. So let's talk about the Falcons front seven. I really like our two middle inside linebackers in Caden Ellis and Nate Lampman. I think they do a really great job in coverage. I think they do a really great job in tackling, and they hardly ever mess up their individual assignments. So when it comes to the pass rush, I like to see our defenders flying all over the place where they get the pressures, where they get the quarterback hits, where they get the sacks. But when it comes to the sacks, we don't get that enough because the quarterbacks just don't get dragged to the ground as often as I would like. And I kind of noticed in the back of my head that a lot of times the quarterbacks that we face are not that very scared of us. Yes, we have a top 10 defense. Yes, we're solid all across the defensive side of the ball, but we do not intimidate or scare the quarterbacks to making dumb mistakes or dumb decisions where it could really cost them at the end compared to us. And then that shows with Sam Howell, where he was cool in the pocket. Trevor Lawrence, he was cool in the pocket. And even now with, Will Levis, he was cool in the pocket. So there's some things we have to make sure that if this Atlanta Falcons defense is going to continue being a top 10 defense, we have to intimidate the quarterback. And so far, we have not seen that going. And I've noticed this pretty recently, but when it comes to elite offensive line play, going against them, we don't do a really great job in getting after the sacks or even trying to beat them, because usually when we get sacks so far, we have been beating rookies or mid-till average players that are really going to show later down the line if we're going to the playoffs, because those are going to be the best of the best. So I'm going to give my points to the Atlanta Falcons front seven only because of Kirk Cousins not playing, and that's going to be a huge dynamic change for the offensive line to adjust. So now let's talk about category number 7. Special teams versus special teams. So when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings place kicker and Greg Joseph, he's doing a solid job. 10 out of 14 field goal attempts. And then, his 3 out of 5 when it comes to 50-plus yard field goal kicks is not bad right now. But remember, he has a leg because back in 2022 against the New York Giants, the last final seconds, he kicked that 61 long field goal for them to win that game. So when it comes to Younghoe Koo, we know he's the true. But when it comes to everybody else, I have no idea what to do, because during the Tennessee Titans, it was just hopefully a phenomena where them all screwing up, their assignments, and I don't know why. But I'm going to give the points to both teams because both special teams units are pretty good usually. So now let's talk about the final conclusion. My final predictions is that the Atlanta Falcons will win this game 27-23 with a win, but I really do not feel comfortable in saying that because the only reason why I'm going to give the Atlanta Falcons this win, not because I'm biased, it's because it is Arthur Smith's job to lose right now at this point in time, because we saw what the Las Vegas Raiders did to Josh McDaniels. We only got a year and a half in and before they fired his ass, and we have seen this recently where a lot of organizations will fire the head coach. Doesn't matter if they've been there for 1 year or 5 years. It doesn't matter. You gotta win and have results consistently enough to be a head coach at this day and age. If you guys lasted this long to the very end of the episode, thank you so much for taking your own personal time and day to watch the Falcon content videos. I like making videos for you guys. Here's more on the screen if you guys are interested in. So what do Falcons do? Rise up. Until the next episode, show love and peace to the world, and peace.